This is The Extra Mile.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Extra Mile. I'm Caleb Spear along with
G5.
the G5. Going to get right into our topic this morning. Racial tensions. They have never been higher in this country since really the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And of course, Christians cannot be silent about these matters, nor can Christians be hypocritical about them. But no matter what, we have to be a light.
Yeah, exactly. And more importantly, we should be reasonable. We should be willing to listen and even change if we see change. We, as Christians, we should know that change starts in the heart. When we look at churches, a lot of ways churches reflect our nation. And we closed out our last episode about the riots that you could say was spurred on by this deep-rooted nationalism by contrasting that with reasonableness. And we close with this passage in Philippians 4:5.
Yeah, and Christians are told there to let your reasonableness be known to everyone, which means Christians, we can't always just be on the attack, always talking. We can't always be defensive if we don't like something, but we have to be willing to admit fault, and at the very least, to be reasonable, we have to be willing to just listen.
Yeah, and we're reminded that in James 1:19. It says, be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. When we're angry, what we do, we shut off our ears. We don't like to be lectured to. We don't like to be told that we're wrong. Being lectured to can spark some real anger, but listening should be more than just hearing someone talk. It should be reflecting on ourselves and our own actions and showing empathy to those who may feel hurt.
That's exactly it. So we're going to have a conversation with two fellow preachers of the gospel who are also men of color, and they're going to share some wise, they're going to share some godly things with us when it comes to Christians being both reasonable and willing to listen when it comes to racial justice.
I hope you enjoy.
All right. Hey guys, thanks for coming on in The Extra Mile today. We got here in the top left corner on your screen, we got Alexander Newman. Newman, give us a little rundown on yourself.
Hi, I am Alexander Newman. I am currently preaching in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I graduated from FC, Florida College, back in 2015. And, I'm very excited to be on this podcast. I've tried to have a pretty big hand in how we handle these racial conversations over the past couple of months and as my time as a preacher. But ultimately, the gospel is what's most important. So I hope that's what we're going to be focusing on today, and realizing that the only way we can find peace and hope and justice is in Christ. So.
Nice. And then down there in the bottom, in like a full-blown green screen studio and all down there, we got Roy Mason. Roy, give us a little background on yourself.
Hey everybody, my name is Roy Mason. I am a biblical studies major at Florida College, and I'm finishing out my last semester. I've been preaching in this area for about 3.5 years, so I'm really excited to be here. Go way back with Alexander and Caleb, and I just really value conversations like these. I think it's good for Christians or like-minded people, even different people of different minds, to just be able to sit down and have discussions like this. So I'm really excited to be here too.
We're excited to have you guys. It's good. I'm looking forward to our conversation, and I think it'll be good. It'll be good for people to hear this too. We're going to go through a series of questions, and we're going to have you guys answer it. We really want to keep this light and conversational. And also, more importantly, biblical, because it's all about glorifying him and understanding that we are to love him and our neighbors as well. And so our first question for you guys is there a racial problem in the church?
You want to take it or you want me to?
Seniority.
This is a question like people naturally have been asking over the past couple of months. It's hard for me to say paint with the broad brush that the church has a racial problem. I think that when you look through like statistics, particularly in COCs around the nation, that they're majority white, so they kind of get raised with that mentality. But it's very hard for me to look at the church and be like, okay, there may be struggles, particularly with like saying ignorant things, but to say that the whole church is racist, I don't think that's true. Growing up in a congregation my entire life, the church is the place I felt like my race mattered the least. And I think that's super important because no one ever treated me any differently because of my race. It was when I was acting like an idiot that I got in trouble and stuff like that. So it wasn't until I either went to school or whatever that it became a bigger deal. So naturally, I think when it comes to how we raise our children and some, I don't know, there's plenty of examples of bad racial tensions that happen in the church, but overall, I just don't have that view.
No, that's uplifting. That's how it should be.
Yeah, that's pretty positive.
Yeah, it is. Roy, you think you have any issues you have or have experienced?
Well, I guess for the most part, I would agree with Alexander that I wouldn't generalize the entire church and saying that there's a huge like problem of just racism being everywhere. But I do think there are
Right.
race problems or racial issues in terms of, like, for example, I come from a military family, moved several different times. I've moved 6 or 7 times in my life. So in every state that we'd go to, we'd worship at a different congregation. But for majority of it, right, majority of my life, I worshiped at congregations that were majority Black. And it wasn't until one of the final moves that we made to Colorado that I went to a congregation that was majority white. And it's almost like two different, like entirely different social bubbles. There are people and Christians and communities that I had no idea like existed until worshiping at a majority white congregation. And you could say that and vice versa. And talking to some people, they experience the same thing. I actually still have conversations with people where they'll say, hey, there's a congregation in the area that is a Church of Christ, but it's majority Black, and they have no ties to it, have never had a conversation there. They don't even know, like they couldn't say if they knew it was a faithful congregation or not, just because they haven't been there. And so I think there's still that divide in terms of, I think the church could look more diverse. But I wouldn't outright just say everybody's a racist, but yeah.
Sure. So everyone's agreeing on the board. It's not like obviously today, especially people are outrightly saying we don't want people of color in their church. Like you'd be hard pressed to find that person. Maybe you found them last week in the riot, but not in the church overall. Probably not going to find those people. I guess, what do you believe are the factors at play? I guess specifically this is back on you, Roy, because you just talked about how you had Black churches, white churches, and what do you believe are some of the factors at play that creates sometimes a racial divide amongst own brethren?
I don't know. A lot of times I talk to people about being the change that they want to see, and I think everybody would fight for diversity within the church. I think if you went to a majority Black congregation, they'd say, of course we want more races or other races here. Or if you went to a majority white congregation, of course we want more or other races here. But I think maybe there's a cultural pressure in terms of people say that, but I think that would take a lot to do. Like it'd be weird to be in a congregation where you're if it's majority Black, we're the only white person there, or vice versa. And so I think it just takes a lot of, and I think that takes a lot more time and effort than people may understand or realize. But there's probably a lot of people stepping out of their comfort zones. And being the first to take that step, and also having people who are ready to support them in doing that or doing such a thing. I just think that everybody's behind that idea, but I think there might be more to it than people first realize. So,
Now, Newman, you said you felt like it wasn't that way at your congregation growing up, where you said you felt like race mattered. Am I quoting you correctly? That race mattered the least when you were at church. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the way
did you ever?
But
That's great. Like that's the way church should be. But starting with Newman, did you ever, whether it was at the private Christian school you were at, or it was at some sort of Christian function, or specifically that church, did you ever have a moment where you did feel like by other Christians you were treated differently or unchristlike because of your race?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's plenty of examples I've heard of with other people. Just in general, I think that there is kind of this almost generational thing where there's stuff that happened way back in you can look at preachers rhetoric back in the 20th century, and you can clearly see that they did not have the right view of how Christ views race and how we should be handling it. And then that gets passed down to their kids, and then they pass that on down to their kids. If they're not teaching them something different, they're letting them live in ignorance. So once you get to this point where we have a huge hurdle to jump when it comes to that. But the way that people treated me, I know it's not inherently just them. I know that's years of people mistreating them with their rhetoric towards people who look like me. But particularly, it's a lot of comments when it comes to being just dumb. There was oftentimes my freshman year being a very much the minority outside of being like the basketball team. It's me and like another guy my freshman year. And it seemed like everyone was berating me. If you wanted to make a racial comment that was supposed to be hilarious and funny, it was coming at me. And that is really hurtful. You really do feel like an outsider in that type of situation. So again, while I do understand that it's not entirely their fault that they've also been raised in ignorance, but it does cause a lot of pain. And I think we have to take a real good look at ourselves and how we talk to one another, how we reason to one another. Because even when you're a kid, college student, the way you treat one person in that situation, that has a big effect for how it goes later. So in the church, it's been good, but I think we have to be aware of how we're teaching our children, and that's where it affected me the most, was with particularly the kids.
And then Roy, you want to answer that question?
Yeah, I actually agree a lot with Alexander, and I think it touches especially on the idea of sometimes it's the subtle things and how much they build up. Because I experienced that same thing too, in terms of the kind of jokes that people would make, and jokes are jokes and people make them. You understand that, but when it's so repetitive and you're like, this is something I'm now starting to hear like every day, or like so many people feel like they have to make this kind of joke to me or say this kind of thing to me, you start to feel some kind of way about it, and so. Like we were just saying, it may be hard to, it would be pretty hard to find someone who's just in the church who's just outright racist. But on the other hand, there may be some social things that we can inform each other on a little bit better, or help each other to understand. I guess those of us who know that can tell that to other people. But I think Alexander will also admit that being on the receiving end of that, it's also our responsibility to let people know, to be like, hey, it's kind of like the 5th time I've heard that today, or hey, that makes me feel this kind of way.
What would an ideal future be for a more biblical church when it comes to things like race and that we're talking about? What would you like to see in the church? What does a reasonable relationship look like?
We'll give it to seniority again.
I'm sure there's plenty of things that Roy and I can go back and forth on. I think having conversations like these is the first step. I think when we have our opinions and then we go on the internet and we find more opinions that line up with our own, or you go on the internet and you find someone who's Black and their opinion lines up with your own about how you should think about this, and then you use that almost as a weapon against someone else's experience or against their personal beliefs or something like that, that's really destructive. So what happens is we use the internet and we use almost like other people of our race against one another as a weapon, rather than, let me sit down with you, let me understand where you've been, let me understand your experience, and let's talk about this naturally from a scriptural point of view. Because when you mix in the world with how you interact with one another, it's always going to be destructive. So when you're able to come together, reason together, look through scripture and see, how does God handle this issue? How does Jesus handle this issue? And how are we supposed to learn from this? You're never going to end up with the solution, you should be racist, we should segregate our churches. It will never be that way. So I think that's the first step.
So it's almost like the internet's creating this wall between us and trying to have empathy with others.
Yeah, I absolutely think that. I mean, just simple cyberbullying, that's how that's worked out. But you're able to say a lot of things on the internet that, it's nothing. So.
But you just want to say in person. Yeah. Roy, what do you think?
I think the ideal way that would look was kind of like what I was talking about in the future is walking into a congregation and diversity not being, hey, there's a couple of like Hispanic people here, a couple of Black people here, but it truly is like mixed. That's something that my mom always looked for, said she wanted, is like a true just mixture of people. And kind of like Alexander was saying, I think that does happen with discussion, people being willing to sit down and have these kind of talks. But I guess definitely people starting to get out of their comfort zone. I think that's an idea that's preached in the gospel a lot, is this idea of not that there's anything wrong with being comfortable, but it can get dangerous when things become too comfortable, and just being ready and being willing to step out of your comfort zone to make sure some good is happening. And so, who better to make a congregation diverse than you being the one to go to a place that might be culturally different from yours, just to say, I'm going to make an effort to reach out in this sense.
I like those. I like those. Sorry, Caleb, to step out for a second. How would someone be comfortable, do you think, though? I mean, there's a lot of people that don't feel comfortable having these conversations.
Well, I think this is one of the way, and I think it's ironic that we were just talking about how the internet can be used as kind of a weapon in some senses, but definitely it can be used as a tool as well, like the conversation we're having now. But there are a lot of YouTube channels that I like to watch that are real social ones that um, gather their viewing off of people of opposing views, or people of different views, or whatever, sitting down and having a conversation. And so there's a lot that you can learn from that. And I think that's definitely one way, is that if someone is uncomfortable, they can look in a conversation that they don't feel comfortable with putting themselves in yet, but see someone else doing. And I think the internet, like, is really good for that, or just um having support, having a group. I remember when I lived in St. Louis, and I was worshiping in Ferguson, and a group of white girls from down the street came to our congregation, and obviously they stuck out, but I think the fact that they were there together made them more comfortable being there. And so definitely taking people and having friends and people with you, I think it's going to make them more comfortable in that situation.
It's really good.
All right, when it comes to scripture here, what do you guys have in mind when we can just start this idea of being reasonable and listening to one another and seeking out to bear one another's burdens? What scriptures came to your mind that's going to have a Christ-like point of view on not only race in the world, but race as brothers and sisters?
My default one that I love and appreciate a lot is Acts 10 with Paul or Peter and Cornelius. I think that one has a tremendous impact on, like, this is an apostle, and he has a kind of bigoted view of the Gentiles at this point. And God works through Cornelius, and through his sovereignty is able to bring him to an understanding of what the gospel is for. It's for the Jew and the Gentile. I love that passage a lot. But I think particularly when it comes to reconciliation and how we speak to one another, having that reason, 1 Corinthians 12 is really important to me, I think. So over in 1 Corinthians 12, towards the end of this passage, he talks about how the body is composed of many members, that there are some people who have different qualities and different traits that are helpful and beneficial to the body. And it's not our place to say, I can cut you off and I'm going to work just as well. And it's not for us to also say, I'm so insignificant that I'm not worth anything, because God has given dignity to every part of the body. We just work differently, or we work for different tasks and stuff like that. So I think that's just an important thing about the body overall and how we handle that. But the conclusion that Paul starts making, starting in verse 25, that there be no division in the body, but that the members have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together. And if one member is honored, all rejoice together. So when there are hard things that go on this summer, like for instance, this summer, when it was George Floyd and that incident, if the first reaction was these riots are horrible, condemning the entire, BLM movement, whatever, I think that's a wrong position to take. I think that if you have a Black brother and sister on your Facebook or in your congregation, you go and you talk to them, you're like, how are you feeling right now? How can I care for you in this moment? Because everything, it went straight to politics instead of how can I care for the body? And I think that when you have that care for each other, that not only is it when things are bad, but also when things are good, knowing what your brother's going through, that's something that's helpful and beneficial, uplifting them. Only Jesus can give us this joy. Only Jesus can bring us this true reconciliation. And it starts by letting his spirit change us into what we're supposed to be in the body. I think that's really important.
Great thoughts there. Excellent thoughts. Roy, did you have other passages like that?
Yeah, exactly like that. I think it was pretty similar to what Alexander's just saying.
Mhm.
Staying in Acts, my first thought to speaking with reason and being reasonable comes from Acts 17. And it hits on it a lot in verse 2 and verse 17, even later in the next chapter in verse 18. But it talks about how Paul made a custom of going to people, or the Jews specifically, and reasoning with them, speaking with reason. It says in chapter 17, verse 2, and Paul went in, as was his custom, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and rise up from the dead. And so it says the same thing later on in verse 17, but the idea is kind of like what Newman was saying. And I can see how things could easily get out of hand, especially in topics of racial issues, especially when you have movements and people who are making really radical claims or really controversial things, and other people will support those movements or support those people while not necessarily even supporting or subscribing to everything that they say or do. How things can be easily misunderstood and taken the wrong way. And so I guess what we were talking about, using the internet as a weapon, or just how we're coming across, you don't want to bash people over the head with your comments, and or just be really forceful or tear people apart, but staying of that peaceful mindset and coming across peacefully, and um, using reason in your words, I think will go a long way. And I think that's the first thing that we see that even Jesus does in a lot of situations in his time where he's hurting the most after the death of John the Baptist. He still shows compassion on other people. So even in hard times, responding to people with compassion, because I think that's going to be the first thing that they notice and remember, right? In a time where they're hurting or having a hard time, that people went out of their way to show compassion to them, even when they were also having a hard time, or when they didn't necessarily understand everything. So
Mm. George is going to read James 3, chapter 3, verses 17 and 18 right now, and what that says when it comes to being reasonable.
It says, but the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace.
Yeah, I looked up in the Greek English lexicon that word for reasonableness. It says not insisting on every right of letter or law or custom, yielding, gentle, kind, courteous, or tolerant. So the people or Christians with a reputation of being reasonable are known for not, shoving their opinion in everyone's face. They're known for being yielding. They're known for being kind. They're known for being courteous. They're known for being tolerant. So that's like the biblical, obviously, point of view in hearing out these tough topics. Why do you guys think that naturally many conservative Christians have a real aggressive defensive position when it comes to issues such as race?
well,
I guess we'll start with seniority again. Oh, no, we're going to start with Roy. I'm so sorry. Go for it, Roy.
Like we were saying before, I think people think it's pretty obvious that most of the congregation isn't filled with just outright racists. And a lot of people, I don't know if I'd say pride themselves on that, but they will definitely say, I am not a racist. And so they don't take kindly to being pointed at or accused of being one in any way. And so I think that's why people get defensive. And also, I think that there has been a little bit of a pattern of people being told that they have to feel bad or need to feel bad about some of the stuff going on. There's some people who are like, listen, I'm not a racist. I'm not doing these things out to the street. My grandparents and like my ancestors didn't have slaves and things like that. So why are you putting this pressure on me to feel bad? And I think that's why people come across defensively at first. But one thing that I've been kind of pulling from all this is that even in that situation, being a racist or not being a racist or whatever, it should just be the standard. There's still this expectation of us as Christians, kind of like how you were just reading about the peace and the gentleness and the tolerance that are attributed to Christians. That's something that should be expected of us, right? So it goes farther than just the things that we don't do, but the actions that we do take, right? And so while I'm not a racist, I still am caring about other races and other people, and that's something that people can see in my life. That's something that's very evident. So I hope that answers that question.
Like, at least acknowledging it,
Yeah.
understanding the issue that it is an issue.
Yeah. Newman, you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. The idea that people, it's not even necessarily an accusation. It's just like, be aware of what's going on in the world, and you take that defensively, almost as if you're saying that you're condemning them. It's like, you know, honestly, if I'm bringing something up like this to you, it's just because I want to know that you care. And that's one thing that
Mm.
I've thought about recently when it comes to how we handle like the Black Lives Matter movement versus the All Lives Matter movement. When someone says that Black Lives Matter, you don't have to associate with the movement for that statement to be true. So when you are dismissive of it
Mhm.
and you say all lives matter, it makes me think that you don't care about possibly things that I struggle and things that I go through. Um, so with the same heart that Jesus has, this heart of compassion, I can look at what's going on in the world and how other people treat one another. I can look at how some black people's rhetoric, how it would offend my white brothers, and I stand against that as well. And all I'm asking is for someone to do the same for
Mhm.
me when it comes to this other rhetoric. Um, and that's a part of being a part of this body. And I guess there's just so many things to get defensive about. For the Black Lives Matter movement type thing, there's a lot of things that are unbiblical about the way that they go about it. And I'm not going to deny that at all. But I think it's important that we do acknowledge that we can separate ourselves from movement, and these these few words can still be true. And I think that if we
Mm.
teach that, if we live that, there's nothing else that really matters in there. So
I like what you said
Yeah.
there. Kind of like what I was saying before is that I think the subtle things do make a difference, and like George was just saying, like acknowledging stuff, I think is a huge thing. Touching on what Newman was saying, that if I have an issue or a problem that's encompassed in the racial issues that are going on, and you're not acknowledging, or it seems like you're not acknowledging it at all, that's you like just saying that my problems or the things that dealing with don't exist. But at the same time, again, it's the subtle things. I think a lot of people who are in that situation really appreciate those who are willing to ask, right? So we're talking about people who are uncomfortable before and things like that to say, hey, I'm not sure what's going on. I don't understand what's going on, or I'm not doing anything, but is there something I could be doing? Or how do you feel about this? Or what are you going through? I think that goes a long way. And I think that's a really simple and subtle thing to do. But that can mean so much to people. And again, is acknowledging what a person may be dealing with.
So correct me if I'm wrong here. I want to make sure we're clear, communicating clearly. We're saying, of course, no one individually, in the churches want to be racist or view themselves as racist, obviously. But we are saying that perhaps in some points we have put our own opinions and politics over the things that the Bible clearly teaches or what Jesus would be or do. Am I understanding this right?
we get comfortable in our ignorance.
Mm. Hmm. George is going to read James 1, 8, and 9. This bounces off exactly what you guys just said.
It says, "But if you fulfill the royal law as expressed in the scriptures, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You are doing well. But if you show prejudice, you're committing sin and are convicted by the law as violators."
So that's the principle.
Yeah, I mean that's the principle from verses 1 through 4.
Yeah. And then down in James 1:13, it says, "For judgment is merciless for the one who has shown no mercy, but mercy triumphs over judgment." And of course, human judgment is flawed. You guys have been emphasizing that. Sometimes we have blind spots. But if we're going to be like Christ, obviously, as we started, we're going to be reasonable enough to hear people out, especially brothers and sisters in Christ. Why are we going to shove them off to the side?
And that goes really well in with James 3, which also says, "Full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere." So mercy should be really, I mean, God is merciful, and we should follow in suit with that.
Yeah, it doesn't feel very merciful if it's like, I'm trying to speak for your experiences, saying, no, it's not that way, instead of, as James 1:19 clearly says, hey, be slow to speak. Let's be swift. Let's be quick to hear. Let's listen first. I mean that is crucial. All right, we're going to wrap it up here. I guess we'll kind of give you a closing statements moment. I mean, what do we want people in Christ Church to be? What can we actively do to make sure people feel heard and loved from a biblical point of view?
Number one is always preach the gospel. That's what's most important. That
Mm.
the way to unite both black and white people and people of all sorts of colors all over the world is that we're broken sinners. And that's unfortunate news. But the good news is that Christ died for all of us so that we can all be reconciled to the Father. And that's the most important thing. So if we're emphasizing the gospel, we won't make these racial discriminations unless we're taking from our personal point of view. Listening to one another, again, having these conversations, not dismissing one another, really important in that. And just teaching those who are younger that this is how we treat these conversations. Here's how the Bible teaches them, because we're only going to be here for so long, and what outlasts a lot of what we do is our legacy and what we teach other people. So if we are teaching them that it's okay to mistreat people of other races, that's going to be taught, and that's what's going to be lived in future generations. So it's important for us to emphasize that God loves them. We're supposed to express that same love to them, and just being compassionate, loving people. So.
That's good.
I totally agree. Looking at issues like this and recognizing that it isn't a political issue or cultural issue, but like a sin problem at the heart and core of it. And so not looking to other places to find the solution or find the way to fix it, but ultimately looking to Jesus and looking to God to solve that, doing what we can. And then also, going earnestly in prayer to God to pray that he does what he can. At the same time, communication and listening to each other, I think, is also very important. One of my favorite teachers, or like my best teachers from high school, was just a really great teacher. He said the way that he became that great teacher is simply through asking. He just asks his students how he can become a better teacher. And so I think that can help us in just about any role that we fill, whether it be being a better servant or being a better brother or sister to someone, is asking them. And not only when times are bad, but when times are good, because that's probably the time that we're going to be most unaware. It's like, I'm not sure if I'm doing anything wrong. I don't know if I'm doing anything wrong, but let me ask you, am I doing something wrong? Is that something that you receive from me? Do you feel as if I'm showing compassion or care to you as my brother and sister? So definitely going out of our way to make sure that is known to people inside and outside of the church, and just being willing to hear them and ask them and just reach out to them, whether it's uncomfortable or not.
These are basic things that really help, just build a relationship too. I mean, that is key. Jesus did that, and we see that the solution to many of these problems is, the true gospel, and delivering that gospel. It means being kind, being, trying to be Christ-like,
and gentle and reasonable. All
of that we have to be aware of.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, Roy and Alexander, thank you all for taking the time to talk about a tough topic, but a much needed one. If we just ignore these things, it'll create more problems. We have to be able to talk with our brothers and sisters. And it sounds like, as you guys just capped off, and George just capped off too, the solution is to really view other people as Jesus would view them, as fellow sinners, but also as fellow image bearers of God. God shows no partiality. All right. Thank you all for talking with us.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having us.
See ya. Hey everyone, thank you guys for tuning in and listening to our conversation with Roy and Newman. I hope you guys enjoyed. There is more content, extended content, right, Caleb?
There's a whole lot more, like at least another hour of conversation. So if you're interested in that, we'll put the link in the description if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast platform, go ahead. You can find us on YouTube. The Extra Mile now has its own YouTube page. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks. Bye.